Welcome to the Fearlessly Inspired podcast. We are two military veterans ready to lead, empower, and inspire women in all areas of life. We are proof that your past doesn't have to define you and your circumstances don't have to hold you back. We are your hosts, Courtney and Barbara. Welcome to the show.
Hey listeners, welcome back. We're so excited to have you with us again today. If this is your first time, welcome to our show. Today we are going to take a moment and get to know our host, Courtney. We're going to seek some advice from her and then get a little sneak peek into what she might have up her sleeve after retirement. So for many of you, before we do get started, we actually launched our podcast today. And so we have, just want to say thank you to everyone who's, provided their feedback to us and just so many positive comments and messages and phone calls. And I think, Courtney, you could probably say the same. I mean, I've just been very overwhelmed with the amount of responses that we actually got today.
No, I definitely am. And, I think, the other day you said, even last night, you were like, I feel like nervous doing it. And I was like, I'm not nervous. And then this morning, our other bestie, Jamie, was like, I'm just nervous. She said, I'm going to listen to it. And I was like, oh my God, now I'm nervous. Not that I'm like, not that I was afraid of like anybody like critiquing what we had to say, because I really don't care. If it's for them, it's for them. If it's not, it's not. Keep it moving. And so, but no, everything has been super positive and like, I don't know, it's almost like giddy,
Yeah. It's, even when I look at our picture that's on our podcast, when we were showing it, I would tell Courtney every single time I saw it, I was like, oh my goodness, it just makes me smile. It just, it just gives you that good feeling because at the end of the day, I feel like we're really doing something positive. And, this is, for me, I'm not really one who goes live on like my social media platforms, but you are. And this is more of like me dialoguing with my friend. And so it just comes so much easier for me.
Yeah. I think it's easier when it's just your voice and, like nobody's jumping on the line and you can see them watching from the other side of the screen, or you can see their comments and get distracted but my cousin even was like, you have such a good podcast voice. I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm like, she must have listened to the intro.
Oh boy. The intro is great. Yes, I would agree.
So, all right.
Well, let's get started. So, Courtney, our first question for you today is, what is something that you have failed at that has actually turned out to be one of the best things that could have happened to you?
Okay. So I think, maybe my response is going to maybe surprise a few people, but, there have been so many failures in my life, but I think my marriage was one of the most important failures that I have overcome. And so I'm sure there's listeners out there that are like giving the good old head tilt, like, okay, let me explain without getting too deep, because, some things need to be left to, personal, a little personal, but I'm going to give you a little sneak peek into it. So, when I was married, we didn't know how to treat each other like husband and wife. Our relationship leading up to marriage was very unconventional. And I wanted his love so bad that I fought tooth and nail for it. And so when I was so young when we met, and I really didn't know who I was, because I was like 18, or I was 18 or 19. So I had no idea who I was, and I was lost. And so in marriage, I did everything I could to make him happy. And if he didn't like something, I changed it. I changed myself to please him. And so I don't think he even realized that what we were both doing to each other. I think it was very unconscious. And so there came a point where I looked in the mirror one day and I realized I no longer knew who I was. And so I became so worried about who he wanted me to be that, so that he would love me, that I stopped loving me and I lost my identity. And so we did end up divorcing, and I started to discover who I was again. And I started setting personal and professional goals, which I really wasn't at that point in my life. I was kind of like going with the flow of things. Like I was still doing well, but I was still going through the motion sometimes, because I was more focused on him than I was anything else. And so once I got divorced, I started dreaming again. I started loving myself again. And I really worked on reclaiming my identity. And I continue to discover more about myself every day. So in hindsight, if it wasn't for that failure, I may have never rediscovered who I was. And so I may have never learned how to love myself again. And so you don't know how strong you are until being strong is your only choice, the only choice you have, right? So now I like to help women, other women who maybe have been in the similar situation where they've lost their identity behind being a wife, being a girlfriend, being a mother, be whatever, fill in the blank. Any of you can fill in that blank. And so, my message would be, you are a woman who deserves to have your own goals, your own dreams, and you should pursue them without excuses and without having to make yourself small for somebody else.
It's to hear you talk like this now. I was there for, a good period. Well, your entire marriage, right? I,
Yeah.
you know, I was there for the whole marriage portion, but not necessarily for the whole relationship. And so just to
Mm-hmm.
hear you, how you talk now and how you talked then, and I think I personally have told you, along with, some probably other friends, like, you deserve better. You deserve better, and it was, we have always set boundaries when it comes to talking about relationships. And so just to hear this side of your story, uh, it's interesting to really appreciate where you are now versus where you were, 10 years ago.
Right. And it's funny because after I got married, or after I got divorced, I had connected with a friend of mine. And when, we talked, she's like, I'm so glad that you got divorced. Like you deserve so much better. And like I think just hearing somebody else say it, like, hurt, it like made my heart hurt, like, because, and, let's be honest, there's so many friends, you have friends right now, and, this could be anybody, not obviously you, but you have friends right now that in the back of their head, they're saying she could do better, like she's settling. And so it's like, you don't really realize that when you're in the midst of what's going on.
Right.
And so to hear somebody verbalize something they've been thinking without you knowing, like just watching from the sidelines and just observing everything, was like really like a really, it was hard to hear.
I'm sure. Relationships are a tough thing. And, as friends, you always want to kind of, shelter your friend from being hurt. But at the same time, it's something that we all have to go through, and we want to go through it our own way and learn it. We learn our lessons, and that's how we build our future anyways. So, all right. Well, let's not stick on that one. Let's
Yeah.
move on to the next question. In the last 2 years, what have in the last 2 years, what have you become better at saying no to? Does that make sense?
Yes. So I don't know. So like, if you know me, like, that I always have like a million things going on in my life. Like, I'm always like willing to help a million people. I'm always willing to like get on the phone with you and help you in your business. And just like, I'm willing to just do so much for others that I often overextend myself. And so, on top of the stuff that my own projects, right? Like podcasting and blogging and whatever else I decide to come up with this week. So sometimes I take on tasks that like I realize won't get me closer to my goals. And that might sound a little bit selfish, right? So, but at the end of the day, like, I have to ask myself, and if some people might have heard this before, like, is it a hell yes? Like, or is it if it's not, then it's a hell no. So um, Courtney, would you want to do a podcast? And if I have to think about it and I'm like, yes, hell yes, you know what I mean? Then I'm going to do it. And if I'm going to look at it and say, yeah, I don't know, then it's a hell no. So like I said, that might sound selfish, but at the end of the day, I have to maximize my time, focus on my goals too, and then help people that one really want it and maybe this sounds selfish as well too, but deserve it. You know what I mean? Like you can't just help every single person on the street or every single person in your business or every single person in your family, right? Like you'd never have time for you. So, and I think when you decide to say no to things and be a little bit be a little bit more selfish, then you can also protect your energy too. So,
I think that's a good point. You know, even with the, releasing the podcast today, the first thing everyone asks you is, how did you just take on a podcast? You have, X, Y, and Z going on. How did you fit a podcast in? And it's really about balance, right? I mean, finding the balance that works for you personally and understanding what you can sustain. And you're always going to help people. It's just in your nature.
mm-hmm.
But and I think you mentioned this in one of your earlier in our earlier podcasts, that you have to block that time for yourself, and then be able to know that respect your time so that others respect your time.
Right, and I did talk about that. I talked about that in episode 2 about goals for your business.
Right.
And so yeah, you have to be a little bit of selfish with your time because you can't. I'll be honest, I've done it before. I've poured from an empty cup for years when I was in the military. And so when you pour from an empty cup, like eventually there's nothing else to pour. And so if you don't start doing stuff for you that are going to help you reach your goals and your dreams, then what's it worth?
I agree.
Yeah.
All right. Well, speaking about being overwhelmed, when you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, what is it that you do to get you back?
I feel like I really have to just walk away and just, clear my thoughts, like, sign off of social media, like just be alone for a second and just sit with my thoughts and, maybe sit with some tears, right? Because sometimes, there's been times where I've been so overwhelmed that I've just come home and just collapsed in tears. And so when you feel those feelings, and I think this is the problem with some people is they stay in those feelings way too long. And so, you stay in feelings way too long, and that's when depression and stuff sets in. And so sit with those feelings, get back up and figure out what's next. And so I think that's the easiest way. And if you have to sign off of social media, then take a detox, but I think, obviously I'm going to tell you a little secret, but a good nap helps too. And this girl likes to nap.
You are the queen of naps.
I am.
I do really miss my naps since motherhood because I don't get as many. And just the other day, my husband, I didn't have the kids and he was at work and he said, "Oh, you should take a nap." And I'm like, I just got so many things to do that I don't have
Right.
time for a nap right now. So, you know.
Girl, I can sleep anywhere. Like I've slept in a Humvee. I've slept on the flight line of a Qatar airfield. I've slept in the freezing cold of Ireland's airport. One of those things.
my,
I've slept everywhere.
my husband made me stop taking the pillow because every time I'd get in the car, I would just fall asleep. He's
Oh,
like,
I know that drill.
oh, yes. All right. Okay. So, well, we've heard all the places that you've slept in the military. So,
Girl, I
a-
can sleep anywhere.
after 20 years of being in the Army, which again, that's an amazing accomplishment, what has the experience taught you about yourself specifically?
Well, I think it has taught me a few things. I definitely think it has taught me to be adaptive and prepared for change. Obviously, my sleeping anywhere can tell you that I can adapt to anything. Um, but really, you can't predict what your life is going to look like year to year in the military. So, every 3 years, sometimes even for some of us, like every 1 or 2 years, you pack up your life, you put everything you own into boxes, and you move to another state or country. And so once you get there, you start a new job, you meet new people, and you have to prove yourself all over again. And I say prove yourself, and I don't. I guess you'd have to kind of understand the military to understand that, but like nobody knows you. For the most part, nobody knows you, so you have to prove, what you know. How you lead, like just what kind of supervisor you are, like your knowledge base on what you're doing. And so that's what I mean by prove yourself. And then this other thing I would say, it has taught me to be resilient. I've experienced a lot of challenges in my military career and in life in general, and that I have learned you just can't be angry, mad, upset, defeated. And once again, you sit, when you are, because you're going to face adversity, like, let's be honest, like being a woman in the military is difficult. Like not everybody likes a woman that's in a leadership position or, tells you what to do. That's just not, that we can go talk about social norms, but, people just aren't okay with that. And it's a small population. The rest are undercover, but whatever you're feeling, like feel it for a bit, get back up, put your thoughts together, and figure out what your plan is to bounce back. And that leads me into saying, hey, always have a plan B. If the military teaches you anything, it's don't assume things will work out the first time. And so you should always expect that they won't and have a backup plan.
And just on that last statement, some people could kind of raise an eyebrow, right? You're always assuming it won't work out and always have a backup plan. And, some people can take that as somewhat of a negative comment, right?
Right.
And to put that positive spin on it is that, in the military, there's just so many different possibilities and so many things that could happen. I mean, you think about a deployment and,
Mm-hmm.
you think you're just going on some simple, recon, and it turns out to be something way much bigger, and
Right.
so, always being just one step ahead of of where you are, I think is what what
Talking about.
Courtney's talking about here. It's not, always looking for the next best thing, in that kind
Right.
of
And,
sense. And
and
so,
and it's also not like what ifing it. It is what ifing it, but it's not what ifing it. But you have to sometimes be like, okay, you can't put all your eggs in one basket and say, hey, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to move across the country and I'm just hoping to get a job when I get there. Like
right.
that's not how it works. Like you have to have more than one plan just in case something doesn't work out. So that's kind of like what I'm talking about is like, you know, just have a plan B.
Right. Okay. So I think it's a good segue. So what advice would you give to a young woman who's actually joining the military?
And this is based on, I want to just preface this by saying this is based on my experience, and that's 20 years of experience. But I want to say that women are not your competition. And in that experience, there has always been this, even from the beginning, there has always been this underlying feeling that women were not your friend and they were always your competition. And so, if you have the opportunity as a young woman joining the military to find a mentor that is a woman, then latch on, girl. Like, latch on and, like, be, because you are blessed. Because in 20 years, I never had a woman that was my mentor. And most of the girls that I were friends with were all people from different units, other than Jamie. And, me and Jamie were like sketchy of each other too. And we had been in the Army less than a year. So, find you a mentor and, latch on and just be the sponge, because somebody like me could give you so much advice that could help you through your military career without having to go through all the things that I went through. And it's funny that I say this because just a little segue is that my friend, she was in my unit. She's my friend now. We weren't friends then. She was in my unit, and at the one time, like 5 females came in at the same time, just before we were about to deploy. And I gave her some advice, and she looked at me crazy. And she just, and she looked at, and it went in one ear and out the other. And she, did exactly what I told her not to do. And, basically, even now she'll tell you, well, I guess I had to learn it for myself the hard way. And that's cool. But, like, I don't know. I just, I had their best intentions at hand because I was giving them advice that I had learned the hard way through. And so, yeah. So the second thing I would have to say is, and this is going to be hard to hear, but it's the truth as well. I would say that you're going to get a lot of attention when you come into the military. The ratio from women to men is very low. So don't get caught up in being relationship focused, like love relationship focused, and focus more on your personal and professional growth. And just, do your job, like learn your job, be the best at it you can be, you know, try to just set goals for yourself and just, crush them. And then obviously, I think we both can say this is take full advantage of a free education. It took me way too long to start doing college. It took me way too long to get an associate's degree, and it's taken me way too long to get a bachelor's degree. When I could have done this instead of going out drinking and partying it up.
Yeah, whenever you have a woman ask you or talk about going into the military, I think these are two main probably answers that we give to people. And it's not to discourage women,
No, absolutely
and
not.
it's really just to be like, look, you can be this type in the military, or you can be this type in the military. And, obviously I use different language when I'm talking to people, and, my terminology for those two types are probably not appropriate.
No, no,
So,
they're not.
but my point is that, you know, I think the reason that Courtney and I have probably stayed friends as long as we have, and I think we may have even mentioned this, is that we weren't in the same unit. We never
No.
worked together. It was more that we had mutual friends. And so, you know, Courtney and I are very much alike, in our mentality. And I can't imagine having two of us in any one unit. Like
Oh,
I'm not sure that anyone could have handled that. So it's it I highly, highly recommend, taking full advantage of your education, because I think so many of us regret that in hindsight, that it took us longer than what we expected. And then when you get out, you don't have that. I mean, you still have some education that's paid for, but it's not really that free,
mm-hmm.
long-term education. I mean, you had 20 years to use it, and you probably
Mm-hmm.
spent the last 5, 6, years trying to get it done.
Right.
And
And
so,
I want to say one thing, Barbara, is that those two things that I just kind of mentioned, that they could relate to any girl, young woman going into college too,
oh, absolutely,
because
for sure.
it's very similar. Like it's just a similar environment in so many ways. And, the same thing, like focus on your education, because, you get involved in, sororities, or, being away from home for the first time and being free, and like somebody's paying for your housing, somebody's paying for your food, you get a paycheck just for showing up, even if you don't do a lot of work.
Right.
Obviously you do work in college, but focus on your education, focus on your goals, and not get caught up in, yes, you should have fun, yes, you should experience new things, but don't do it in excess.
Right. Keep moderation
So,
going on.
right, everything in moderation.
Right. Well, so I think that, your 20 years of experience, we could honestly say that we wish that we had that female mentor like you spoke about, right? And we didn't. I believe at some point you and I had the same mentor.
We
you know,
did.
I mean, to this day, anyone that I talk about, I always say that he knew how to bring you down and pick you back up all in the same sentence. It was like,
Let, let's just give him a shout out. Let's give Big Will a shout out.
I know, right?
He could listen to this
He
and
could,
he'd
he
be
could.
like, "Oh, I'm so proud of my girls."
Yeah. And he was probably one of my favorite leaders. And I probably, just thinking back, like there's very few women that have passed through, my path that I can even remember. And so, at some point I was attached, well, both of us were attached to field artillery units, which was, definitely the ratio was off there. And
Yeah.
so, I think that to see where we've come now and the focus that we have put into helping other women hopefully learn from our experiences, um, I hope that that's what we're doing now. I hope that, somebody will listen and not have to learn the hard way. But I mean, we were just as stubborn as them at one point, you know.
Oh, for sure.
I feel like sometimes, you're always the mom now. Like you're like, listen to me. And, even today as I'm trying to tell my kids something and they had to learn the hard way. It's,
Right.
so that's just how it is for us in the military as well, or in life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, well,
So, do
Courtney,
you have any other questions for me, ma'am?
no, I think that's it. I think we'll let you rest there. But
Okay.
oh, wait, we do have one question left.
Oh,
So,
okay.
can we get a little sneak peek into what Courtney has up her sleeve after retirement?
Well, I think I mentioned this in our third episode about the John Maxwell certification. And so it's funny that you mentioned it because I was talking to somebody today, another John Maxwell team member, and, just, seeing where he's been and what he's been doing with what he knows and his military experience. And so I definitely am finishing my certification for speaking, coaching, and teaching for the John Maxwell team. If you guys don't know who John Maxwell is, we definitely talked about him in our third episode. And I highly recommend that you download his podcast because it's a ton of great information. But so I'm going to do that. And then I'm actually part of a group called the Difference Makers. They're an organization of survivors, victim advocates, and victims of human trafficking, sexual abuse, male victimization. And they actually go around the country to military bases and some non-military organizations, and they speak about sexual assault and harassment, education, and prevention. And so being a investigator or a CID agent and specializing in sexual assault investigations, I became very passionate about, stopping them and, educating people. And so I really hope to focus my efforts on, on speaking in the near future.
Well, that is awesome. So, of course, we will be a part of that journey together.
Yes.
And, I'll get to hear so many of the great things, and hopefully we'll get to share some of that throughout, our different podcasts. So thank you so much for
That
taking the time and answering our questions.
right.
Because I know getting a little personal can be a little edgy sometimes. So,
No, for sure. My face is really warm right now. So but in closing, thank you, listeners. We hope that you'll join us on our next podcast as we get a little bit more personal with our other host, Barbara. Let's turn the tables a little. And I'm going to ask her a few similar questions and some advice. And as always, you can find our blogs at www.isparkleglitter.com and www.fearlesslyfreckles.com.